bare dra? Henrik, kan dere ikke bare dra baugen I stedet for å fortøye den hele tiden?
Well, it's a fairly late steam engine. The early ones were very, very primitive. And this is among the more efficient ones. The trouble with the steam engine is they're not very efficient. The thermal efficiency, I think, is barely above 15%. 85% just goes up in the form of heat. But I'm sure that Asbjørn will know the numbers. I'm guessing when I say 85. And you will hear when they start running that there's no sound because the steam engine is virtually silent. There are no explosions going on inside it, just steam. You know. So Asbjørn told me a little about the restoration process. It's cost them about 50 million kroner so far to restore it. And just the coal to keep it chugging costs around 5,000 kroner a day. And then there was 4 people manning it at all times. And just to pay for the coal, you would need 100 persons on it for every trip it runs. And that's without taking anything else into consideration. So he thinks that this project is financially completely impossible and that this trip we're on might actually be the last trip with paying passengers on board. Because it's the last trip of the season. Running it like this was an experiment, and it's quite possible that it will never go out with passengers again. So enjoy. Asbjørn told me that when the ship was sunk, the engine was taken out, and a friend of his, who was actually a schoolboy, bought it for 1,000 kroner. He hadn't quite calculated the weight of the thing. It was 6 tons, and he couldn't get it anywhere. So he ended up donating it to the Technical Museum in Oslo, and they kept it until the ship was raised again. And that's the whole reason why they could even consider raising it, because a triple expansion steam engine in good condition simply isn't anywhere to be had.
So how long was it underwater?
Let's ask Asbjørn. Asbjørn?
Ja.
Hvor lenge lå skipet på bunnen? 30 years.
30 years.
30 years. 30 years. I show you where.
Yeah, okay. He'll show us where it was lying. Asbjørn personally owns something like 4 smaller steamboats in this, and you can find a little leaflet about his boats here. So he's a real steamboat enthusiast, and he's invested a lot of his own money in it. But not anything as wild as this. So if only a certain young man had been on board, you could have played Kate Winslet. Yeah. So this is the lake. It's called Femsjøen. And Asbjørn can show you where the ship lay for 30 years. Very still. You can see the coal smoke. Look at the coal smoke. It's got a good smell.
Yeah.
It's a lake called Femsjøen, and the locks on the other side were made primarily for floating lumber down here from the forests further up.
Can you translate what he just said?
He said that in 1967 nobody saw any hope of keeping this boat afloat anymore. So they took the engine out and took it out near this island and fired off a small charge of dynamite and had the boat sink. And for 30 years it sat on the bottom until somebody thought, well, we have to do something. So they took it up and had it sent, loaded on a very, very big truck and sent across the Oslo fjord to Stadhelle, where the company of Hansen and Arntzen shipyard spent 3 years restoring it. And last autumn it came back to its home place, and everybody in Halden was very impressed. And I think we need to be impressed about this, because madness on this scale is truly impressive. And it's hard to imagine that only 130 years ago conditions were so primitive that somebody would do this for profit. And it says something also that, I mean, coal was also expensive back then. I think it was even more expensive than now. It was shipped to Norway on old sailing ships from England. And yet they did it to keep this boat running, because transportation was very, very expensive back then, and people were willing to pay for it. And today we take for granted that transportation should cost practically nothing. But each ticket now that we should cost 450 kroner for us. We're not paying because we're the guests of the captain. But 450 kroner a passenger is what, and even that is nowhere near what it would take to bring this thing up into making profit. But 130 years ago, it made a profit. Because people paid for transportation at a scale that's hardly conceivable today. You know, in the old days, when you were traveling through this landscape, you needed to change horses now and then. But the horses wouldn't just be there, they would be off somewhere on the pasture. So in order to make sure that the horses were there when you needed them, you would send somebody ahead, riding. And they would pass the word that your carriage would be required, it would require horses. And then the horses would be there at the appointed time. So you couldn't really just make up your mind to go traveling somewhere, you had to plan. And that's the kind of skill that human beings are meant to have. Modern life looks complicated, but it's actually extremely simple for most of us. And it's kind of thought-provoking that human beings, or nothing in nature really, escapes the principle of use it or lose it. And we are certainly not now using the mental capacity that we were evolved to have. And the easier we make it to survive, I think in the long run the lower our skills are going to be. In the 1590s, this technology came to Norway, the high technology of sawmills, water-driven. And maybe Asbjørn can explain what that is.
This is the fundament of this wooden wood mill.
Yeah.
And water-driven with a big wheel.
Yeah.
But it's very, very many years since it was any action there. So after they take the timber out from these lakes and down here and float it to this 27 sawmills in the waterfall.
Hallo alle sammen. Da kommer et beskjed.
This is so quiet. What is that?
The tunnel there is for the overflow. So when there's a spring flood, you don't want the dam to overtop. So they bypass the dam by sending water down there. And that means that the power station is somewhere in the dam. You know how lock works? No. It's like a tub that has two sets of gates, and when we enter, we're going to go up. So we enter through the lower gate, and the gates lock behind us, and then they simply let in water and fill the whole chamber up. And when we're up at the top, they will open the upper pair of gates, and we will go into the next chamber. And I think there's either 3 or 5 chambers in the first sets of locks we're coming up, and it's a fairly substantial rise. This boat is more or less exactly the same size, I think, as the lock chambers, so you couldn't take a bigger boat up there. And if I'm right, I think we rise something like 20 to 30 feet in each chamber. But that's from memory.
And that's high.
That's very high from that type of lock, very high.
What's all the excitement?
We're gonna go to the lock chambers. So the lock is opening now, and it's got metal gates, which makes it much easier to take the pressure from the water behind it. You can see how high the water goes, and when the When the water level is up something like 6 meters, you can imagine just how strong the pressure is against the gates. But the gates open inwards and they actually close against each other at an angle like that. So the more the water pressure, the harder the gates will push closed.
Deilig skog,